He did not try to. With fresh vitality, he swam toward the sound. He heard it again. Then it was cut short by another noise, crisp staccato. Pistol shot, muttered Rainsford, swimming on. Something was killed, clearly. 10 minutes of determined effort brought another sound to his ears, the most welcome he had ever heard. The muttering and growling of the sea breaking on a rocky shore. Muttering and growling, that's more personification for you. He was almost on the rocks before he saw them. On a night less calm, he would have been shattered against them. With his remaining strength, he dragged himself from the swirling waters. Jagged crags appeared to jut up into the opaqueness. He forced himself upward, hand over hand. Grasping, his hands raw, he reached a flat place at the top. Dense jungle came down to the very edge of the cliffs. What perils that tangle of trees and underbrush might hold for him did not concern Rainsford just then. All he knew was that he was safe from his enemy, the sea, and that utter weariness was on him. He flung himself down at the jungle edge and tumbled headlong into the deepest slumber of his life. That's a metaphor, too. You can't tumble headlong into sleep. So there's a lot of figurative language used throughout here to sort of give the story the feel that it wants to have. When he opened his eyes, he knew from the position of the sun that it was late in the afternoon. So again, I know I keep interrupting myself, but more characterization. Rainsford's smart. He uses the environment around him to position himself to understand his place and to make decisions. And you can see that there. Sleep had given him new vigor. A sharp hunger was picking at him. Personification. He looked about him almost cheerfully. Where there are pistol shots, there are men. Where there are men, there is food, he thought. But what kind of men, he wondered, in so forbidding a place? An unbroken front of snarled and ragged jungle fringed the shore. He saw no sign of a trail through the closely knit web of weeds and trees. A metaphor. It was easier to go along the shore, and Rainsford floundered along by the water. Not far from where he landed, he stopped. Some wounded thing, by the evidence, a large animal, had thrashed about in the underbrush. The jungle weeds were crushed down and the moss was lacerated. One patch of weeds was stained crimson. A small glittering object not far away caught Rainsford's eye and he picked it up. It was an empty cartridge. A .22, he remarked. That's odd. It must have been a fairly large animal too. The hunter had his nerve with him to tackle it with a light gun. It's clear that the brute put up a fight. I suppose the first 3 shots I heard were when the hunter flushed his quarry and wounded it. The last shot was when he trailed it here and finished it. He examined the ground closely and found what he had hoped to find, the print of hunting boots. They pointed along the cliff in the direction he had been going. Eagerly he hurried along, now slipping on a rotten log or a loose stone, but making headway. Night was beginning to settle down on the island. Bleak darkness was blacking out the sea and the jungle when Rainsford sighted the lights. He came upon them as he turned a crook in the coastline, and his first thought was that he had come upon a village, for there were many lights. But as he forged along, he saw to his great astonishment that all the lights were in one enormous building, a lofty structure with pointed towers plunging upward into the gloom. His eyes made out the shadowy outlines of a palatial chateau. It was set on a high bluff, and on 3 sides of it, cliffs dived down to where the sea licked greedy lips in the shadows. So a palatial chateau, if you don't know a chateau, is a hunting lodge, sort of an aristocratic French-style hunting lodge. It's also got this Gothic feel. It's up on these cliffs with the ocean all around it. It's nighttime. It's got towers. It's backlit with the lights shining. And then the sea is characterized as licking greedy lips in the shadows, which sets the scene of sort of an animal that's hungry and desirous to eat. We know that, of course, Rainsford also is hungry because that came out earlier. Mirage, thought Rainsford, but it was no mirage, he found when he opened the tall spiked iron gate. It's interesting that the gate has spikes on it. What does that say, too? I mean, it's a very forbidding place. The stone steps were real enough. The massive door with the leering gargoyle for a knocker. More tone here. Scary Scooby-Doo mansion sort of a thing. It was real enough. Yet above it all hung an air of unreality. He lifted the knocker and it creaked up stiffly as if it had never been used before. That's a simile, but clearly there's not a lot of guests here. It sort of reminds one of Dracula's castle. If you've read Dracula, I think there's a commonality here, and it's intentional on the part of Connell. He's creating sort of that Gothic horror air. He let it fall, and it startled him with its booming loudness. He thought he heard steps within. The door remained closed. Again, Rainsford lifted the heavy knocker and let it fall. The door opened then, opened as suddenly as if it were on a spring, and Rainsford stood blinking in the river of glaring gold light that poured out. That's a metaphor, too. The first thing Rainsford's eyes discovered was the largest man he had ever seen. A gigantic creature, solidly made and black-bearded to the waist. In his hand, the man held a long-barreled revolver, and he was pointing it straight at Rainsford's heart. So clearly a dangerous place. A scary guy who could probably beat the tar out of Rainsford holding a pistol aimed at his heart. I think we're supposed to be taken aback just as Rainsford is. Out of the snarl of beard, two small eyes regarded Rainsford. "Don't be alarmed," said Rainsford with a smile, which he hoped was disarming. "I'm no robber. I fell off a yacht. My name is Sanger Rainsford of New York City." The menacing look in the eyes did not change, the revolver pointing as rigidly as if the giant were a statue. More similes for you. He gave no sign that he understood Rainsford's words, or that he had even heard them. He was dressed in a uniform, a black uniform trimmed with gray astrakhan. So he's wearing a uniform. It's a black uniform. The guy's a military man. That's characterization of this giant that he sees at the door of the castle. "I'm Sanger Rainsford of New York," Rainsford began again. "I fell off a yacht. I am hungry." The man's only answer was to raise with his thumb the hammer of the revolver. Then Rainsford saw the man's free hand go to his forehead in a military salute, and he saw him click his heels together and stand at attention. Another man was coming down the broad marble steps, an erect, slender man in evening clothes. He advanced to Rainsford and held out his hand. In a cultivated voice marked by a slight accent that gave it added precision and deliberateness, he said, "It is a very great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Sanger Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to my home." Now, he knows who Rainsford is, the celebrated hunter. I think that's important that there's an immediate recognition on the part of this stranger who lives there. He lives in a giant hunting chateau, so there's sort of a commonality between the protagonist and this gentleman right at this moment. Automatically, Rainsford shook the man's hand. "I've read your book about hunting snow leopards in Tibet, you see," explained the man. "I am General Zaroff." Rainsford's first impression was that the man was singularly handsome. His second was that there was an original, almost bizarre quality about the general's face. He was a tall man, past middle age, for his hair was a vivid white, but his thick eyebrows and pointed military mustache were as black as the night from which Rainsford had come. His eyes, too, were black and very bright. He had high cheekbones, a sharp-cut nose, a spare, dark face, the face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. Turning to the giant in uniform, the general made a sign. The giant put away his pistol, saluted, and withdrew. So we can find some interesting things out about General Zaroff right here. First off, he's a general. He's a military man. It says here that he's used to being obeyed. That's direct characterization. We don't have to think about that. And then we get this description of him that's sort of paradoxical in a lot of ways. He's a tall man, but he's slender. So he's got sort of like this imposing, but yet not imposing sort of thing going on.